All right, welcome back to the program. This is The Real Story with Jeannie Ives, and this is where we put real people who understand policy better than I do in front of you, the listener, so that you can hear the real story about what's going on. In this instance, we have with me Mailee Smith. She's with the Illinois Policy Institute, and we're going to have a brief discussion here about the Illinois Amendment 1. That is the right to collective bargaining measure. It is going to be on your ballot in November. You're going to either vote to make Illinois the worst state in the union for businesses, or you're going to vote to reject that come November. Mailee, don't you think that basically sums it up? We're either going to be pro-business with this vote or not, right?
Exactly. Right. That just summed it all up. It's being framed as a workers' rights amendment, but it's really a first of its kind constitutional amendment in the nation. No other state has this. It has multiple provisions. It's going to grant a fundamental right on par with speech and religion to unionize to all government employees. It's expanding bargaining beyond wages and compensation, those things that we traditionally think about as part of bargaining. It's going beyond that to include broad new subjects. And in addition, it prohibits lawmakers from ever limiting that right. So it really takes away the people's voice, right? Because their representatives, the people they elect, can never do anything to fix the problems that are going to occur if this happens. And it bans right to work. So, what does all of this mean? There's no limit on what government unions can demand and go on strike over, because that will be a permanent right. There's no limit on what government leaders can give away in negotiations to government unions. And who is going to be forced to pay for this? It's the taxpayers. It's the taxpayers, businesses, and individuals alike who are already feeling the brunt of our economy here in Illinois. And it is exactly what you said. It's going to be bad for business, and it's going to be bad for the taxpayers of our state.
It basically tells businesses you do not want to expand here, and if you can get out and move your cash cow business that you've created here in Illinois out of the state, you probably want to do that in the future, because they're coming for you. They're coming for everything that you own, your property, your home, your business. It'll all be just an ATM for unions. That's what they're coming for. I mean,
that's right.
Right. So here's what's interesting. If you actually read the amendment, and I have it in front of me, it says, this is the amendment. You're going to vote on it. If you're listening to this program, understand that you need to vote no on this amendment. But here's what it says. Employees shall have the fundamental right to organize and to bargain collectively through representatives of their own choosing for the purpose of negotiating wages, hours, and working conditions, and to protect their economic welfare and safety at work. No law shall be passed that interferes with, negates, or diminishes the right of employees to organize and bargain collectively over wages, hours, and other terms and conditions of employment and workplace safety, including any law or ordinance that prohibits the execution or application of agreements between employers and labor organizations that represent employees requiring membership in an organization as a condition of employment. Okay, that's what it reads. That would go into, there's a couple problems here. One, it's one thing to pass a law that is easily then repealed. It is another thing to add this language to the Constitution, which then would require a 60% vote of the majority of people to repeal in the future. It is egregious. And the other thing is the clause to protect their economic welfare. I mean, that is an open-ended invitation for the unions to control anything they want to extract anything they want to from their employer.
Right. And maybe even beyond that, right, to the taxpayers themselves. Mm-hmm. We see Chicago Teachers Union already demanding things that, might fall under this category of economic welfare. But right now, that's kind of a gray area, and Lori Lightfoot doesn't have to give in to those demands because they've, one in rent abatement issues to be negotiated.
Right.
Funding the police, economic and political issues to be. And because economic welfare is so broad and it's undefined. It's not just undefined in the amendment itself, it's undefined in our case law because there have been no cases litigating this yet. There is really almost no end to what they can negotiate and demand. And like I said, that permanent right to strike is the sword that they wield over and over, especially CTU, over government leaders, over the taxpayers. They know that they have a monopoly. They can walk out at any time to get their demands met. And so if they have this whole host of almost unlimited demands in front of them now, we almost can't even imagine how much more government is going to cost the people of Illinois if this passes.
Well, you have put a price tag on it, though. The Illinois Policy Institute has written numerous articles, and one of them says that this literally will raise property taxes over $2,100.
Right. Yeah, and that is a very cautious estimate. It's likely a never-ending.
Right.
Yeah, it's likely a never-ending tax hike. That $2,100 is based on our current trajectory. Like, if this passes and things kind of maintain their normal demands, it's going to go up by at least that much. But because they have these broad new categories of demands that will cost even more, we can, and because no other state has ever done this that we can look to say, oh, well, look, costs went up that much. It is almost, it's almost impossible to figure out exactly how much this is going to cost. That $2,100 is like the baseline. It will be at least $2,100 for property tax payers.
Well, the unions are all up, they're all in here. They basically have raised, it looks like, upwards of $8 million. $8 million about. To pass this, and they're calling their little committee the Vote Yes for Workers' Rights. This is not about workers' rights. They have a lot of rights already in the state of Illinois. They're protected in numerous other ways. This is basically let's rob the taxpayers amendment.
And it's misleading to voters. Not only is the website, but ads that have started playing, they are depicting this as a workers' rights amendment as if it applies to all employees in the state. And that is the way it's framed. It says employees. It doesn't define public sector, private sector. The problem is that private sector employees, the majority of employees in the state of Illinois, are already protected by the National Labor Relations Act. And once the federal government already occupies a space, the state can't go in and try to regulate or occupy that space as well. So this amendment, even though proponents are claiming it applies to everyone, it cannot apply to private sector workers. It only applies to government sector. So they are depicting this as a workers' rights amendment and misleading voters into thinking that they are voting for something that this amendment cannot do.
Well, and it's also a little bit misleading as well, because if you look at the supporters, you're like, oh, it's the Associated Firefighters, it's the laborers, it's the teachers union, but it's also the AFL-CIO, the pipe trades, healthcare workers, SEIU. Well, in many cases, they may sound like they're a private union, but the truth is they work in the public sector. They enjoy lots of benefits because they do a lot of public work. And that's where they get more of their power from than maybe the private jobs that they do, building or laying pipe for a private company. A lot of that money, whether it's NICOR gas pipes or you name it, or SEIU healthcare, for example, they're working in the public domain. And so they may sound like they're a private union. In reality, they really are a public union.
Right. And it's those government union bosses that are really, they really are the ones that have something to gain here. Mm-hmm. This amendment hands over more control to government union bosses than it does to lawmakers because of that provision you read. Lawmakers can never pass a law that includes taxpayer relief or pro-business funding or not funding, but just any kind of pro-business reform. Mm-hmm. Because they're prohibited from doing it here. What this amendment does do is elevate those government union contracts to the level of the state constitution. And that allows those contracts to actually trump state law.
It is absolutely unbelievable. So, I mean, there's a number of situations where you look at a legislation, you're evaluating it, and you say to yourself, well, you know what? Okay, I'll just gonna pull one out of my hat here because I was talking to another legislator about it. Oh, we're gonna put tampons in the boys' bathroom. Okay, this is completely unrelated to what we're talking about, but to some degree. But my thought on that was like, okay, first of all, or we're going to actually make you tell us whether or not you actually have catfish on the menu. That was actually legislation probably 5 or 6 years ago, catfish labeling requirement for restaurants, because apparently some restaurant in downstate Illinois was putting some other type of fish in for catfish. Okay, you look at laws like that and you say to yourself, you know what? Even if you think that this should happen, is it something that should be legislated at the state level? And it's the same thing with this. Even if you think that this is a good idea, which it's not, by the way, it's not, is it something that we should be putting in our Constitution?
Right, exactly. And
No.
that's exactly why no other state has done it. No other state has provided a fundamental right to unionize and bargain. No other state constitution allows government union contracts to override state law. No other state constitution prohibits lawmakers from enacting reforms, and no other state constitution bans right to work. So every single part of this amendment has never been enacted in any other state. And there's a reason for that. It doesn't belong in the state constitution. And as we talked about previously, it's bad for businesses and bad for taxpayers.
I'm flabbergasted, and it's unfortunate this has not received more attention by the mainstream media, and actually, honestly, Republicans who need to speak up against this. And I know that they've kind of prohibited, as an elected state rep or state senator, from weighing in on constitutional issues to some degree. They can just provide base information, but I don't even see that information being provided for. So I'm glad you came on this podcast to explain this in more detail, because people need to be aware of this. This is a deal killer. I've often said, listen, I actually think there's maybe 5 reforms that you could do at the state level that would absolutely change the trajectory of this state. One of those reforms would be to make us a right to work state. But I've also said this as well. So you want to keep your unionized state. Go ahead. Fine. But you cannot be bad in every other respect, which means you can't have the second highest gas taxes, the second highest property taxes. You can't have, work comp issues that are like the 4th highest in the nation rates that drive business out. You can't play the green new energy deal where you're going to decimate our energy economy. You can't be bad in every case, in every other issue, and be a unionized state and think that you're going to be successful.
Right.
And you have to give and take. But but in this case, you would literally seal the fate of Illinois going forward.
It would definitely. We already see businesses leaving the state citing our poor business climate and the high taxes. So what will this amendment do? Make those taxes higher, drive more businesses out. It's going to prohibit the state from enacting these pro-business reforms. So that current exodus of jobs and businesses is going to get worse, and the economy is going to suffer for it. The flip side is, though, that, if Amendment 1 does not pass, workers retain their rights because, like you said, we're already a heavily unionized state. So private sector workers, they are already protected by the National Labor Relations Act. Public sector workers here in Illinois are already heavily protected by our very broad labor laws that are already existing in state law. So if Amendment 1 doesn't pass, workers don't lose anything. They still have broad protections. And at the same time, lawmakers are going to be allowed to change laws in the best interest of those workers and other taxpayers. So, we talked about a little bit about the ads and the website being misleading. A part of that is that, these workers already have some pretty elevated rights, and that won't go away if Amendment 1 doesn't pass.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I think part of the problem is that a lot of people don't understand how much control the unions have because they haven't been on a city council or in a school board or in a negotiation. And this is true of a lot of legislators. They've not served at the local level where they've had to been in an environment where they've negotiated a contract with a union. I will tell you this: it only took one negotiation with a union where I figured out very quickly that all the control to protect taxpayers rests at the state level, and it's not at the local level. So many local officials, their hands are tied already by our heavy-handed rules that protect unions and their benefits. And so people need to understand that. But what everybody could do, and I encourage them to do, is to actually go to your school board website, go to your city's website, and read a union contract. Read a union contract and tell me you're not appalled by the minutia that is discussed in detail about the benefits conferred to public sector employees that taxpayers have to pay for and for which taxpayers do not have in their own jobs. And I think that is part of the problem. People don't even know what's in these union contracts. They're egregious. They specify all sorts of benefits that you just have no, from school loan repayments to paid time off is excessive to now all state workers have election day off too. That's an additional holiday that was added. I mean, you're talking about easily at least 12 sick days a year. You can accumulate them. You can get paid out at the end of the, this doesn't happen in regular companies. Exactly. They can't afford to. They've already got so many benefits and people don't even know this. And then this, yes for workers' rights. Workers' rights? Give me a break.
and it really is like a vote no for taxpayer rights because this is, there are really only 7% of the adult population in Illinois that is a government employee. So this is a right that is only going to apply to a very small percentage of our population. And like you said, the rest of the adult population don't have these kind of rights provided in state law. And they won't under Amendment 1. And I think you're exactly right. Like when you look at these collective bargaining agreements, they can be tens and tens and tens of pages long, 50, 60, 70, upwards of 100. Mm-hmm. And they go into every little detail of a worker's day already. And what Amendment 1 is going to do is just broaden those subjects. So not only is it going to drive up the cost of government because the provisions that are included will be costly, but even the negotiations are going to drag on. We already see, Chicago Teachers Union, AFSCME under the Rauner administration, dragging out negotiations. That's costly in and of itself to taxpayers because that is more days that things are being negotiated, lawyers are being paid for, and it's more subjects over which unions like Chicago Teachers Union or AFSCME can threaten to strike.
Okay. Well, thanks for this informative interview. I appreciate it. We're definitely going to make sure that people hear it, and we're going to talk about more of it. We've been, I guess, working on a lot of other stuff, and I'm just afraid that people are going to go walk into the voting booth and not know what they're voting on when this comes up. It's very legalistic. It's confusing. People don't know. And so hopefully we just got to keep it very simple. Unless you want your house to become an ATM for the public sector unions, bosses, you need to vote no on this. I think that's the clearest thing.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Mailee, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. I really appreciate it. And have a great day.